Wow, been an interesting weekend. You may have noticed that I'm not walking with a stick anymore. That is a testimony, a testament to God. Another testament to your prayers is that I had the great opportunity to drive all the way down to Temecula, which is just north of San Diego, Friday, and drive back yesterday. And so that was an interesting experience. But the reason I share that with you is because I want to start tonight talking about why I was down there. A guy named Dick Enright is my uncle, and he is with Jesus now. And it's interesting because the story of how I got the name Richard was he was at the time playing for the Rams as a National Football Player guard. And as he played for the LA Rams back in that day, they were up in Oregon to play, and I don't know who they were playing in Oregon, but they were up in Oregon to playing, and he came by to visit my mom and dad the day that they got me from the hospital. And so, you know, he's a pretty big guy, and he literally looked at them and said, "You have to name him after me." And they were both scared to death of him, and so they did. So I'm actually Dick. I go by Rich because that's still officially I'm Richard. There he is when he was a young man. And go ahead and go to the next one of him as an older guy. That was him. They called him Papa Bear. But I need to tell you a little of his story. So he was my mom's youngest brother. There were 7 children, and he was the next of the youngest. And they were poor people from Minnesota. And they called themselves German Irish, which meant that Grandpa Enright was German and Grandma Enright was Irish. And there was no question about the differences there. And they're just fun stories. But he grew up, this is why it's fun to me, because he grew up as a fat little kid. Cursed, I guess, okay? But as he started getting bigger, he was eating them out of house and home, and they decided they needed to find something for him to do. And so one of the coaches at the local high school says, you know, I see something in you. You need to learn how to play football. And this coach took him under his wing, and he started playing football at Gardena High School in Southern California. Do you know that high school? All right, well, you'll love this story then, because he started playing there, and he started growing, and he started lifting weights and doing all the stuff that good football players do. And became such a great high school football player that he had a full ride scholarship to USC and UCLA. But he was a Southern California boy, so he went to USC and literally as a sophomore started every game at offensive guard until he graduated his senior year, and then went to the Rams. And after I think it was 2 seasons with the Rams, in the off season was driving on one of the LA freeways, and I don't know if it was a car or a truck, basically had a drive line explode and literally bounce off the concrete and go right through the windshield and hit him square in the chest. Liked to kill him. And had he not been a pretty big muscled up guy, it probably would have killed him. And interestingly enough, he survived that, but he had such a severe concussion after that they said you would be stupid to try and play football again. And so his grand plans of being an NFL player and stuff were dashed in a single moment. By the way, this was all before he knew Christ. And so what's he do? He goes back to Gardena High School and applies to be their offensive line coach. And coaches there for, I think, 2 years as an offensive line coach, became the head coach, and literally took that high school to, I don't know how many state, city championships, literally in a number of years that he was coaching there. He got enough attention that the University of Oregon called him up and said, "We want you to be our offensive line coach." And so he and his family moved to Eugene, Oregon, and he, for 1 year, as the offensive line coach at the University of Oregon, the Ducks. And the very next year, he became the head coach. You guys ever hear of a guy named Dan Fouts? What was the big tight end? Randy Winslow. Anyway, Francis. Russ Francis. All of those guys he coached. And but while he was in Oregon in 1974, somebody shared Christ with him. And both he and his family became believers. And so the interesting part of the story is he kept on doing what he was doing. But as I listened to the guys that coached with him, the players that he coached over the years talk about him, you could literally hear them talk about his faithfulness, his loyalty, his care for them. And it was really moving to me because this guy built a legacy. By the way, after the University of Oregon, he left there to be a coach with the WFL. You remember the World Football League? Didn't last very long. But when the World Football League folded, he actually became the offensive line coach with Monty Clark for the 49ers. And was in the NFL as an offensive line coach and did that, I think, 2 seasons. Matter of fact, for those of you guys who know Jimmy Webb, Jimmy was on the team and knew him. And interesting, I talked to Jimmy this morning about that, and he said, you know what? I knew there was something different about him. And it's just really interesting that a defensive player who really has nothing to do with those enemies over there on offense would know him by reputation. He left the 49ers because it was taking too much time and too big a toll on his family and his 2 little kids, and went back to Southern California and started as an assistant coach for a brand new high school that they were opening called Capistrano High School. And then coached there for a number of years, again, offensive line coach, and then became the head coach. As he was coaching there, in their first 5 years, they won 50 games. Yeah. I don't know what it was about him. People talked about the impact he had on people, but every one of them was talking about how he was a guy who cared about every one of his players. And I can't help but think it was his faith that changed him from the fierce competitor that he was to a guy who was a fierce competitor who literally figured out how to love and invest in people. And so by the time he dies at 87 years old, here a couple months ago, he literally had the opportunity to coach at every level there is to coach at. Ended up coaching his great-grandsons in Pop Warner, but they wouldn't let him on the field because he got so worked up at 87 years old. So they gave him a shirt, they had it on display that said consultant. And I got to talk to one of the coaches that coached the kids' Pop Warner team that were at the funeral, right? I mean, there were hundreds of people at this funeral. And when we started talking about it, I said, wait, I got to go. And he runs and he comes back with this book. They had published a book. It's about that thick. And you open it up and they're just all these plays. And I said, what is this? He says, he would sit in the stands and chart the defenses that we should run. And because he couldn't talk to us on the phone, and he tried calling, but we're not allowed to answer the phone on the sideline. He would literally take some kid that could run back, and he'd run these manila folders with the plays on there. And he said when we didn't do what he told us, he would yell from the stand, and you could hear his voice forever, so we knew how to do it. By the way, they won like 3 city championships in Pop Warner. So anyway, that was my uncle. And I shared that with you. Yeah, I mean, it was just fun. But here's why I share it with you. This is a guy who, when he became a Christian, it changed his life, but it didn't change his direction. And today, if you look at your notes, we're going to talk about our shape, okay? We're going to talk how God made us. And I use him as an example because this is him. His passion didn't change, his heart didn't change, his abilities didn't change, his personality didn't change. He added some spiritual gifts and he added some life experiences. And because of that, as a coach at a whole bunch of different levels, he impacted the lives of everybody around him. And guys, we started this series a couple weeks ago, and I wanted you to know your purpose. You remember the 5 purposes? Love God, love people, grow up or make disciples, invest something back, and share how he's loved you and how he loves them, right? That's our purpose. And then last week we talked about our treasures, and it wasn't about money. It was literally about where our heart is. And our heart is willing to accomplish those purposes. Well, here's how he does that. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. And we're going to start by talking about spiritual gifts. And spiritual gifts are really interesting. I literally have one verse here and I got another verse in my notes. But before we even read that, I want you to, at the top of your page or on the back somewhere, I want you to write 12, 12, 4, and 4. And in front of the first 12, put Romans 12, R-O-M 12. Second one is 1 Corinthians 12. Ephesians chapter 4 and 1 Peter chapter 4. I'm giving you that so if you're really curious about jumping into spiritual gifts, those are the four main places in the Word where it talks about spiritual gifts. 12, 12, 4, and 4. You can remember that. I'd love to tell you that was my bright idea, but literally Steve Warren shared that with me this morning. So I'm stealing it because it's God's stuff, right? I'm going to take you to 1 Peter 4, verse 10. It's in your notes. And I just want you to follow with me and just think about how this applies. 1 Peter 4, verse 10 says, God has given each of you a gift from his great variety of spiritual gifts. So what can we get there from now? What do you get from that very first sentence? Each one of you who is a follower of Christ has been given a spiritual gift. And so if you're a follower of Christ, you have one. That's the first thing. What's the second thing? Okay, read it. There's a great variety. Do you realize that means that none of you may have the same gift? Oh my goodness. Listen, there are some churches who say spiritual gifts are an evidence of your salvation, and if you don't have spiritual gifts, especially one or two that are in particular, then you're not saved. Here's one we'll tell you. If you're saved, you have a spiritual gift, and you might not even know what it is. You may never know what it is because it's something that God puts in you and is part of who you become. And that's why we're going to talk about these other parts of yourself. So that's really important. So there's a variety of them, and each one of you gets one. And then he says this is what they're for. He says, use them well. Okay, when he says well, what do you think he's talking about? Yes. Like, do them what? Do it right. Actually use them. I mean, really jump into it. Use them well. And what are we supposed to use them for? To serve one another. Isn't it interesting that he doesn't say, I want you to hold on to them and just use them for yourselves? No, that's not why we're gifted. We're not gifted so we can brag about ourselves. We're not gifted so we can put ourselves above other people. He says, here's what I want you to do. He's basically saying, I gave you this gift so you can serve one another, so you can have an impact on the world, so you can accomplish what I purposed for you to accomplish for my glory. And if they're for God's glory, then you don't get glory off the deal. And so that's just really important. Okay, let's finish this verse though. It says in verse 11, do you have the gift of speaking? Then speak as though God himself were speaking through you. Do you have the gift of helping others? Do it with all the strength and energy that God supplies. With everything you do, then everything you do will bring glory to God through Jesus Christ. All glory and power to him forever and ever. Amen. And so here's the thing. We could spend hours talking about spiritual gifts and what you have and who's yours and who's not. And I'm going to tell you something that's going to sound maybe a little surprising to you. It would be better if you didn't know what your gift was. Because I can't tell you how many people says, well, I can't do that because that's not my gift. You may have said that yourself once or twice. You may have said, well, I don't feel led to do that because that's not my area of giftedness. Let me explain something to you guys. You know those 5 purposes we talked about before? Those 5 purposes are so we can accomplish those things, and the gift is just to help for us to do that. And here's the key. If you have the gift of giving, and there are some people who just have that gift. God puts it in their heart to just be generous. Interestingly enough, I know a number of people with that gift, and God has also given them the wealth to give generously. I don't know why that works that way. But here's the thing. Just because you don't have the gift of giving, what do you think God says about tithing? Oh, I don't tithe because that's not my gift. Right? All right, so that one's a little bit maybe too close to home. How about this? I have the gift of serving. Good, you can serve everybody else, but that's not my gift, and I'm never going to serve anybody. See, here's the point. God gives you this extra special thing so you can go above and beyond. But all of the things that we all have access to, we're still supposed to do. We're still supposed to be generous. We're still supposed to serve one another. And so I'm going to tell you this, and I hope you take it in the right spirit. If you know what your spiritual gift is, that's a great thing. If you don't and you're interested, you can come talk to one of the pastors or one of the table leaders. There's all kinds of tools online, and you can take tests and figure out where your areas of giftedness are. But here's what I'm going to tell you. Best that you just follow Jesus. And you say, here I am, use me how you want to use me. And it's really interesting how he will lead you to opportunities where you're gifted. And as you do that over a period of time, you may say, that feels like an area I could be gifted in. But honestly, even if you know, it's not for you to put a sign up saying, this is me, I'm special. It's literally, we need to be humble people who just serve Jesus, right? All right, and so, again, spiritual gifts, amazing gifts. There's a lot of them. A lot of people can debate about which is better, which is worse. Here's what I'm going to tell you. In 1 Corinthians, it talks about that we're all parts of a body. And whatever part you are, that's the function you have to play, right? But it's not just the gift that you have. The second thing here in your notes is about your heart. What are you passionate about? Right? My Uncle Dick, what was he passionate about? He was passionate about football. I'm telling you, if you'd have seen the notes in that book that they passed down the field to these dads that are coaching their 9 and 10-year-olds, you looked at that. I looked at the book and I'm going, dude, we weren't getting that kind of scouting reports when I was playing college football. He just loved it. And he had a heart for helping kids. He got to coach his friends. He got to coach people he loved. One of the guys he coached, this is the kind of guy he was. There was a young man at his funeral from Panama, probably of African-American descent, although there could have been some Spanish descent in there, hard to say. He gets shipped to the United States. I don't know how he got there, but his poor family is in Panama. Somehow or another, he ends up at the high school with Uncle Dick's grandson. His grandson's a football player, and they're sitting in the same class together, and they start talking. And this guy's name was Romero. And so they start talking. Guys talk about sports, And Derek's a football player. He says, well, I'm a football player. And they start talking, and they realize they were talking about two different sports. And so, Derek says, well, you're an American now. You ought to play American football. Oh, no, that's a stupid sport. But Derek invites him home for dinner because the kid's got no place to stay. And literally, when they find out he's got no place to stay, he's staying with some relatives that are moving and all this stuff, my Uncle Dick says, well, you can just live with us. And for the next 3 years, Romero lived with them and played American football. So good that he got a full ride scholarship to San Diego State and literally had a 6-year-long career with the Miami Dolphins. Retired in 2014, and you know what he does now? He helps coach young men to play football. He's at the funeral. He's talking about his grandpa, Papa Bear. See, that's the kind of stuff, right? Because a man had a passion for this, some poor kid that lived under his roof didn't have a choice but to play football. Anyway, this verse in Psalm 37, 4 and 5 says, take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Everything you do to the Lord, commit everything you do to the Lord. Trust him, and he will help you. So here's the thing, guys. God gives you passions for things. Your sin nature gives you passion for evil stuff. God will give you passion for good stuff. Some of you haven't really discovered what you're passionate about. It's interesting, as I was becoming a young man, I don't know why, but I just seemed to get along with teenagers. I started serving in ministry with high school students. My wife, on the other hand, hated high school students, even her own. She liked babies. She loved little babies, little baby kids, cuddling them, rocking them, singing them to sleep. Teenagers, literally with her kids, it's like, you know what, come back when you're 25 and I'll see if you made it okay. Her passion was different than my passion, right? And it's just a fun example, but here's the thing. God has given you a heart for some things. And if he's given you a heart for some of his things, you need to commit those things to him and start following your passion, right? The next thing is abilities. He gave Uncle Dick abilities to play football and to coach football and to lead men and to invest in the lives of these boys, right? In Exodus, there's a couple of guys. This is fun. I don't know why I picked this story because I've always liked handymen kind of guys. Literally, there's these guys, and there's one guy in particular that he tells Moses, here's your guy. He's the one that you want to put in charge of building the tabernacle. And this is what God says about him. Exodus 31, 3 through 5 says, I have filled him with the Spirit of God. Isn't that interesting? So apparently the Spirit of God can play a role in our abilities, giving him great wisdom, ability, and expertise in all kinds of crafts. He's a master craftsman, an expert in working with gold and silver and bronze. He is skilled in engraving and mounting gemstones and carving wood. He is a master at every craft. God gives people abilities. He doesn't give you abilities just so you can make a living. He gives you abilities so you can use those abilities for the kingdom of God. You know? Some of you guys are craftsmen, and I know some of you guys who have literally made it your ministry to help. I was thinking about pointing guys out, but that might be a problem in here. I'm trying not to do that. But, I will tell you, there's a brother that's sitting in this room who literally helped me with the plumbing in my house when I was remodeling it, and was an unbelievable blessing. I'm a guy who thinks he can figure anything out. Had I done it, we'd still have leaks. See, God gives you abilities, and it may not be mechanical. You may be a whiz with finances. I'll tell you what, there's hundreds and hundreds of young men in our little church family here, or that's represented in this room, that could use some financial wisdom right now. Some of you guys have abilities. Are you using those abilities for the kingdom? And it says this, in Exodus, it's like God filled him with the Spirit of God. He was filled with the Spirit of God and gave him great wisdom and ability in those areas. You know what? God may be asking you guys to use your abilities for the kingdom. All right, next to the last thing, personalities. He is concerned about your personality. There are some of you who have a personality that would do just fine up here, and there are some of you that I couldn't force up here with a gun to your head. It's just true. Some of you are introverts. Some of you are extroverts. Some of you are leaders. Some of you are followers. Guess what? Every one of those personality traits God will use. Because just like gifts, it doesn't matter who you are or what you are. He made you on purpose for a purpose. If you look at these two verses in Psalms 139, 13 and 14, he says, "For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. And then in John, but Jesus didn't trust them because he knew all about the people. No one needed him to tell him about human nature, for he knew what was in each person's heart. So here's what I want to tell you guys. God made you how you are. If you wake up in the morning and every time you look in the mirror, you're disgusted, you're literally saying, God, you're a loser and you didn't do a great job making me. Oh, yeah. Well, wait a minute. God didn't make me this heavy. Yeah, probably not. But guess what? He didn't make a mistake with you. If you're tall, if you're short, if you're wide, if you're broad, if you got big feet. Listen, he designed each one of you for a purpose. And guess what? If he gave you stuff in the lower regions that's outward, you're a man. Well, you're a male. He doesn't make mistakes. When this world says, oh, no, I was really meant to be a woman. No, you weren't. God gave you the equipment he designed you with. He gave you the color that you wear. He gave you the size. He gave you the hairline. Every one of those things he did on purpose and did uniquely, and he loves every part of what he made of you. And all he says is, I want you to love me back, and I want you to use what I gave you for your glory. It's really, really a simple thing. Okay, let's get to the last one. And this is fun, but it's really interesting. I've had a pretty rough year. My buddy Joe's had a pretty rough year, physically, emotionally. I will tell you that this year I lost more of everything I cared about. It wasn't just my wife. I lost my ability to work in the garage. I lost my ability to see through my right eye in a camera. I lost my ability to actually focus on the front sight and squeeze a trigger. I lost all of those things. And all of a sudden, it's like, the first reaction that we all have is, why? Why'd you do this to me, God? And then I read this verse. It says this in Romans 8:28-30. And I quoted this earlier. It says, for we know that God causes everything to work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. Verse 29, for God knew his people in advance, and he chose them to become like his son, so that his son would be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. Having chosen them, he called them to come to him. Having called them, he gave them right standing with himself, and having given him right standing, he gave them his glory. So here's the thing. You may have had some terrible experiences in your life. You may have done some awful, sinful stuff. I have. The difference is at the point where we quit hiding it and we quit letting it defeat us and we go, God, this is my burden. I did this wrong, but you've forgiven me. How can I use it for your glory? Then for me, I get to stand up here and embarrass myself in front of you, telling you all the stupid stuff I've done. But guess what? God may use that to maybe dissuade some of you from doing some of the stupid stuff I've done. Or maybe you've done stupid stuff just like me, and God uses that to help you understand that he can redeem that. See, that's why what we do here is so important, because us together represent all of mankind. Every sin that's ever been committed is probably present in this room. And not that we should come bragging about it, but we ought to be able to be honest and transparent about it and maybe allow God to use that for his glory. It says this in this last verse in 2 Corinthians 1:4. It says, he comforts us with all our troubles, so that we can comfort others when they are in trouble. We will be able to give them the same comfort God has given us. I got to tell you what, guys. Literally within a month of my wife's funeral service, I had a guy call me up saying, I need to talk to you. And I said, yeah, okay, I'm not quite back to work yet, but how can I help you? He says, I just need to talk to you. Okay, so he came over and I sat down with him. I said, what's going on? He says, my wife just died of cancer. And I'm mad, ticked off at God because she's just, and he shared his whole story. And I said, why did you want to see me? He says, because I know you know how it feels to lose somebody dear to you. By the way, I'm not in a mindset where I'm ready to help him through that. But just the fact that I had that experience gave a very strong, proud man the ability to say, I need to talk to somebody. And you know what? I gave him a couple of answers. We went to the Bible together, we prayed together, we cried together. And at some point, God used that in his life. Is that the reason why he took Bonnie home early? I don't know. See, it's not my decision to figure out why. It's my decision to say, okay, God, what have you given me and what do you want me to do with it? And that's really what this whole section is about. By the way, when we talk about experience, we're not just talking about spiritual experience. I got a list of 6 things there: family, education, vocation, spiritual, ministry, personal. Every experience in your life, good or bad, is useful. It's just, are you willing to be transparent about it and share? Now, I got to be careful. Some of you guys have stuff that you're holding on to that shouldn't be shared in public necessarily, but you ought to have 1 or 2 guys you can share it with in confidence. Because here's the thing, it's literally now a part of who you are, and God made you for a purpose. He's called you for a purpose so you could do the good work he created you for. And so, guys, my challenge is this week is, why don't you figure out who you are? On the back, if you turn that over, you see I have some statements there. It says, I think my spiritual gift or gifts are, I have a passion or a heart for, I have a special ability in, my main personality traits are, I have a unique experience in the following areas. And then look at the last one. It says, how might I use this list to be a blessing for the Lord, his people, and the world around me? So here's the thing, guys. You can talk about the questions. You can, skirt around this if you want. My challenge to you is, though, that you'll fill that out. And you'll start to build a profile. And as that happens, you'll start looking for opportunities to use who you are and who God made you to be a blessing in his kingdom. And guess what? He'll help you. He will give you opportunities. A couple of weeks ago, I mentioned to all the table leaders that here in the next few weeks, we're going to start looking for opportunities, maybe to do some stuff as a table, to serve as a table. I just want to remind you that next week, we're going to start working on some things. And I'm going to talk a lot less next week, and you're going to have more time around the tables to think of how you, as a table, might be able to get beyond the walls. How you, as a dad or a granddad, might be able to get beyond the walls. I heard Joe talking about taking his 6-year-old granddaughter out to feed the homeless yesterday or the day before. And how did she react, Joe? What did she say? Guys, it's not hard. There's opportunities everywhere, and I don't care how messed up you are. If you think you got to be perfect before you can work for the Lord, then you're silly. Dude, he's using me, and I'm a long way from perfect. You already know that. Anyway, so my challenge is, and literally I'd love for you guys to do this, is fill this out, maybe while you're at the table today, but fill it out before next week and bring it back so we can literally have some discussions, and you can use that as a primer for where there may be opportunities for you guys to get beyond the walls together. Father God, bless my brothers. I pray, Lord, that you would continue to guide and direct them, that you'd watch over them, Lord, and that in all these things you would just move us. Don't let us be spectators. Let us be part of the game, Lord. Put us in. Get us off the bench and and use us in a way that would just bring glory to you. Bless my brothers and keep them, watch over them in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks, guys.